Welcome aboard, Dave Barazza, and thanks for coming and chatting with me at Model Railroad Techniques this evening and in the morning here in Australia. So thank you again.
Sure, no problem. I'm glad to be here.
So the first thing I do need to say is happy birthday for the other day. I did promise I was going to sing to you, but I'm not going to embarrass you this morning on that. So I don't have my singing voice going all that well. So I won't put off my viewers and probably pop your eardrums. So as I said, thanks a lot for coming along this morning or this evening for you. And I'm looking forward to having a bit of a chat. I did, when I started researching your blog, and we'll go about that in a sec, is you've taken electronics to the nth extreme, I think. I've never seen anything like this. And John Faraka did warn me of this. I thought I understood basic electronics, but obviously you've taken it to another level, and I'm looking forward to having a chat with you about that. So for what I'll put all these links to below. So the main one is is your blog, which is davebarazza.wordpress.com. And it's a fantastic blog. It really outlines pretty well the whole build of your model railway.
You know, I could have done better with it. I could do better with it, but I'm happy after a couple of years of working at it at the content that's there. You know, sure. Thanks.
So I always like to get to know people's sort of modelling background and where they've come from and where they're sort of going. So can you tell us a little bit about your modelling background and how you got into that?
Pretty typical. I think I was 6 and the model train board appeared in the living room on Christmas morning. Nice. Followed shortly thereafter with my dad building us a train table in the basement. And then when I got to my teens, I undertook expanding that on my own. So it basically quadrupled in size, and we worked on that layout, through high school. And even, most people, a lot of people talk about the rice springer that most model railroaders go on to see if they don't want to devote their time to girls and cars. And I always had a layout. Even I'd come back from college for the summer and I'd work on that layout that was in my parents' basement. They were nice enough to allow me to keep fiddling with it when I'd come home. And shortly after that, there was maybe a 7 or 8 year stretch where I didn't have a working layout. And as soon as I moved to New York, I started on the series of layouts that have been building up to this one. So that's basically it. It was, my dad was he was a lifelong rail fan. Nice. And we chased steam when I was a kid, when the SP 4449 was out first as the American Freedom Train and then later out in daylight livery. He took so many pictures that he wound up being a photographer, and he doesn't rail fan a heck of a lot anymore, but he loves taking pictures of anything. Sure. So it was a hereditary disease. Some would say heretical, but it's a hereditary disease that passed on from father to son. His love of trains was imbued to me, and it continues to this day.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. So, modelling influences. What would be some of the people out there that would be sort of put the fire in your belly, so to speak, to keep going or giving you ideas? Who sort of that you look up to in regards to that side of things?
Geez, that's a difficult question. If you slide the time scale back more than about 4 or 5 years. Sure. I was always a lone wolf model, and I always, subscribed to Model Railroader. And even I'd stop by the library on the way from elementary school and flip through. Our library branch had Model Railroaders going back to the 60s. So, but there was a giant club layout down in Emeryville, California, that was, it was in a warehouse. It was ginormous. And, that was inspiring, but I probably only went there a handful of times as a kid. I didn't have a lot of exposure to modeling and other modelers until I came out to moved out to New York eventually, and started building layouts, and decided I was going to started listening to podcasts. Ryan Anderson, Tom Barbalet, Tom Barbalet, and Lionel Strang, God bless him. It was listening to those, calling into those shows, realizing that there was a community that got me out to the 2011 convention in Sacramento. It got me to the first open operations session that I ever went to, which was right out here on Long Island, where I met John Faraka. So I didn't really come out of my shell and start seeing other layouts and interacting with other modelers until, 4 or 5 years ago. And I have to say that the guys that inspired me from that point were guys with operating layouts, guys with layouts that ran. And most of them are pretty well finished. Phil Monat's Delaware and Susquehanna, John Faraka's Stone Canyon are just two, and I could name, everybody in the Round Robin group has a layout that looks great, that runs great, and it kind of inspired me, okay, so there's something I can do with this hobby that involves me inviting people over and sharing this layout with them. And so it inspired me to get my butt kicked building this layout down here, so that guys could come over and operate. And I just get a huge thrill when we're about an hour and a half into an operating session and my white knuckle terror time abates a little bit, and I can sort of look around and see that there's 7 or 8 or 10 guys here having a good time running trains. Yeah, nice. So my inspiration is basically guys with operating layouts is the short answer, which I should have given 5 minutes ago.
That's fine. You bring up a gentleman named John Faraka. I had him on a few weeks ago,
that's right.
And that's just a stunning layout. Beautifully.
Gorgeous.
Beautiful. Scenery-wise, operation-wise.
Yeah.
And obviously gorgeous you're part layout of his operating group, which is I'm quite jealous about. So, but anyway, I'm in the wrong hemisphere.
Sorry, go ahead.
So that's fine.
Yeah.
So your layout, the New York and Atlantic Railway, is that correct?
For lack of a better name, yeah. It's a thinly veiled excuse to model the Long Island Railroad.
Right.
But since it's an operating layout and it focuses on a day in the life of the various freight crews more than passenger operations, I chose to name it after the freight subcontractor that operates on the Long Island Railroad rather than Long Island Railroad proper.
Right. Nice.
But people, there's plenty of commuter rail action and Alcos and other Long Island equipment running around because that's the life of the freight guys.
Yeah, sure. I've got some photos of some CAD drawings up there of the layout, and we'll sort of just go through those. So tell us some of the statistics. I think model railroads like to know statistics about railways. So you got some 600 feet of main line and 830 feet that you've surveyed, 274 turnouts alone. So what other numbers can you throw at us to, because obviously it's quite a large enterprise.
The basement's 30 by 50. And it's a 3-deck layout, and so it's a roughly 200 and change linear feet of running distance I can get onto each deck. Sure. There's a helix which has got some laps around. There's some other little bits and bobs of the basement that are outside the main area that I can get to. There's areas where you've got on the same deck, you've got different layers because some of the tracks are hidden. So, if you put a measuring tape from Long Island City to Greenport, you would measure 830 feet. Wow. If you went around all the branch lines and stuff. That doesn't count yard track. Some of that's single track, double track, triple track, more than that. There's one section leading into New York where it's 10 tracks wide. But that's all crazy. But the idea is that the western part of the railroad is busy, densely trafficked commuter railroad. So it wouldn't feel right if you weren't running your freight train over a 4-track main line or through Jamaica where it's 6 or 8 tracks wide. It wouldn't, the whole story of the railroad where you're the second-class citizen freight subcontractor dodging passenger trains all day wouldn't ring true if it was all just double track or single track.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, as a systems guy, I embrace the challenge of building big, complicated interlockings. And that's my choice. I wouldn't wish that choice on anybody else.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's what I do for a day job, and it's the subtle nuances of that. I like to the subtle nuances of what I do for a living. I like to show off on the layout so that people who come and operate have a little bit of insight into signaling and interlocking and stuff of that nature.
Yeah, well, definitely. I've got a whole section that we will talk about that side of things in a sec. So you run a Digitrax Wi-Fi through JMRI is my understanding as well.
Yes. What works best in my basement is phone throttles with Wi-Fi going to JMRI and then JMRI into the Digitrax command station. And I'm going to leave it at that because it's a public interview.
That's fine. That's fine. So
I try a lot of other ways, but that's the way that it works best for me.
Right. Sure. So signaling now, layout command control. I've sort of diced around and I did some research because I didn't really fully understand what this actually meant.
Okay.
Until I'm obviously a DCC guy. What my understanding is, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is you got your DCC, it stands alone, that it controls your trains, but then you've got all the add-ons like your signaling, your occupancy detection, and sort of all the other peripherals that sit around that, which is just I think I've always done that on my layout. Mine's purely computer driven, my layout, through a program called Train Controller, which is a German program. So it's probably not too dissimilar to what layout LCC is anyway, I don't think. If I sort of getting the correct sort of terminology of the area or explanation?
Well, Train Controller is software that interfaces with digital command control systems and will actually operate the trains and do so much more. Yeah. I was enjoying one of your videos recently where you're talking about just the subtle nuances of that, because Train Controller is something that I've considered at least twice in a very major way. Sure. So to take a step back, when I built previous layouts, I had basically started to bog down the LocoNet with a lot of traffic to do with signaling and controls other than driving the trains. Sure. So starting this layout, I was going to approach it from having a standalone LocoNet for signaling and a separate LocoNet, which was for just driving the trains. But I went to the convention in 2011, and even more so when I went back to the Portland convention that was 4 or 5 years later, LCC had matured to the point where I realized that that's what I wanted to use as the backbone for non-train driving type stuff, non-regular DCC type stuff, because although it's not a true litmus test to say this, it's not a very good large, you can say roughly LCC has 10 times the bandwidth of a LocoNet. So you could actually, it has, with that kind of a thick pipe, you could put video feeds and telephony onto it if you so choose to do so. So LCC is just it's another way to get information around the layout. It's another way to get inputs, distribute them, have other entities on the same network do stuff with them. It's not in any way unlike what you can do with DCC and the existing LocoNet products or products of that nature, but it's a thicker pipe. It's faster, and if you've ever been in a situation where you have your system hanging up or pausing or losing commands like you can get in some of the other systems that I had used before. That just does not happen with LCC. It is so fast, and it's built in the protocol that a missed message is just repeated.
Okay. So I sort of, I think I've got my head around that. Unfortunately, train controller, because once I started diving into LCC, I got a little bit excited about it because on my layout I run a Roku Z21 command control, or DCC, and then I run a separate. It's called S88, which is like more of a European protocol that does all my occupancy detection. So it runs via a network cable, but it's got nothing like the bandwidth of a CAN bus or what you're talking about, LCC. But unfortunately, at this point, train controller doesn't support LCC.
That's right. I have asked already and gotten no response.
Yeah. So we won't go into that. We can talk about that a little bit more off recording if you like. My experiences with train controller like that. So I'm just trying to work out a way how I might be able to get around it. But whether you've got any ideas, but we won't go into that right now. So now
we don't want people's eyes to glaze over too soon.
No, that's right. That's right. It interests me, but might not interest a lot of other people. So that's fine. That's fine. So I'm going to bring up a video very quickly. Where are we? So it's my understanding is it's one of your tower panels. Can you see that?
Yeah, I see that.
So can you sort of explain what's happening here? And I can run the video backwards and forwards a few times because I think it's just a fascinating little insight into your electronics prowess, what you were talking about. You want to bring your day job to showing people how you might do things in your model railway.
So that's it's called an entry exit panel or entrance exit panel or NX panel for short. And you can see in the video that I'm making routes on that panel by first pushing a button where the train is, followed by pushing the button where I want the train to go. And that's all the operator has to do in that kind of an interlocking. All the switches move and other locking takes effect all automatically, and then the switch is clear. So railroads wouldn't buy it for a simple interlocking, but if it was a plant where they wanted the operators to maximize their human time using the maximize their human efficiency, they would put in these panels because they're very quick to operate. So busy passenger terminals would sometimes have these, or freight yards that would require a lot of moves. It wasn't uncommon to have those. And I was using a program, before I got into the signal biz, I was using a program that simulated interlockings that was made specifically to simulate entrance-exit interlockings as implemented on the New York City Transit Authority, the subway in New York. So I played around with this simulation program, and it's basically how I learned how to write signal logic and devise signal circuits, was making a lot of really badly functioning, unsafe interlockings with the simulator until I got to the point where they were polished. And my model train set at the time was in the basement of an apartment in Brooklyn. And it was the line running through Beacon Park Yard in Boston, and that's CP10 and CP9 on that line headed out towards Framingham was what I was modeling at the time. So I decided that I was going to wire with relays an entrance-exit plant right out of the NYCT typical circuits and see if I could get it to work around my trains. And that was wired between 2000 and 2004 about, and it was the experience of wiring that I sort of carried forward into the business overall. And so it's I've always drug it around to the next layout and found some place to put it because I love that. I mean, there's other pictures in there that should show the rack. It's about 180 relays, little ice cube that are all wired up.
I think that's going to be my thumbnail, and I'm going to do a title along the lines of, I thought DCC was only 2 wires. Something along those lines, because it's a bit of a misconception. But once you start diving deep And I thought my wiring was extensive until I started coming across some of these pictures. But, to give you some sort of idea, I've got, some 200 isolated blocks on my layout. So with that comes a lot of issue, a lot of wiring. So but effectively, you could argue that is still 2 wires. It's just 2 wires by 200. That's all. So,
listen, LocoNet is just one cable. LCC is just one cable. The thing is, you need a lot of other wires that get your information into and out of that system. And that's where the wiring is. You won't have to run hundreds of feet of wire from this switch over to the control panel over there, like when you had a DC control panel with rotary switches. But you are going to have to run a lot of short wires in a busy area just to get your stuff onto the bus, whatever you use.
That's right. I've completely gone away with train controller. So much the side of things regarding I don't wire control panels, and mine are all soft on a computer network now, because I can do that via an IP address, internal IP address with train control, and I think that's the beauty of it. One of the beauties of it, and I haven't given it a real good test in the real world yet, in regards to having lots of operators, because I'm a bit like, I'm still a bit of a lone wolf. I got a few gents that come up and help me out, but so far I'm all good with it, and it seems to be running without too much latency. But we'll see what happens when I start trying to run that across virtual operations, as I'm going to call it. So
one of the reasons why my demand for bandwidth was so intense was I have always eschewed the use of the pre-cooked signal logic that comes with programs like JMRI or Train Controller, and it's only an artifact of my professional life, but I need to have it work the way that I want it to work, and I'm willing to write 1,000 lines of Python script to make it work in JMRI, or willing to go to the trouble of learning how to write event-driven logic for LCC to make it work the way I feel that it should work. And it is perfectly okay to use the cooked-in signal logic that's built into these programs, because it gets you to an incredibly good place. It gets you like 95, 97%. I am probably certifiable because I want to get that last 3%, and which everybody will always tell you is impossible to do anyway.
That's quite interesting. So different modelers, I've obviously spoken to a lot of different modelers, from anywhere from making just purely dioramas and train is not the focus, but it's in HO scale, right the way through to obviously John's layout, which is operational, plus beautiful scenery and everything else in between. He's sort of at a point sort of where I want to be at, I suppose, in many more years to come. And then obviously you're totally the other. So you're the electronics rivet counter, because you want the signaling to be just as it is in the real world, and that's I think that's the beauty of this hobby. I think that fascinates me, that just talking to people about their niche within the niche and what interests them. And I think it's just we've got a lot to learn from each other regarding that side of things. Yeah,
well, it's one of the great things about the hobby is that you meet a lot of people and everybody has a different focus. And John is a very knowledgeable guy, very happy to share that knowledge. And this time tomorrow night he's going to be over there with me, and we're going to be starting some scenery so that I can get that statistic up above 0.1%. And that 0.1 is the station that he built over there. Yeah. So and that's, as a lone wolf, you're going to have a layout that focuses on whatever you like the most, right? But and I've done scenery before. I've built little coffee table layouts and stuff like that, and it's a nice little break to do that, because you can bring them to completion a lot faster than something in a 30 by 50 basement. But which John just offering to come over and help, it is a kick in my butt to make sure that whenever he comes over, there's something that could be done for scenery, and in that way. I'm going to get it done sooner than I would have otherwise, which is great. And without somebody like John who's willing to share their time, I wouldn't be able to do it. So more power to him, more power to the hobby that brings us all together.
He's certainly a gentleman. He was more than willing to talk to me halfway across the world to some crazy Australian, but so I had a good old chat with him.
I don't think I have to talk any extra bit of loudness just because you're far away. I seem to be using my regular voice. So it's no big deal.
That's right. That's good. So, all right. So I'm just trying to get my mind around your layout. So it's operational base. Electronics is massive. Signaling is your thing. So now we're talking, we've spoken a little bit about LCC, and then ultimately your LCC is driving into JMRI, which is what you dispatch your trains from. Is that sort of how that works? Or have I...
Right now, JMRI does two things for me. It is the man in the middle between, well, it handles the Wii throttle server and the phone throttles, and the interface between the Wii throttle server and the phone throttles and the Digitrax DCC system. The other thing that JMRI does is run my operators panels for me.
Right.
And so there's in the signal business, there's stuff in the field along the wayside that's called vital that can't fail, or if it does fail, it fails in a safe manner. Any remote control scheme that's ever been put into a North American railroad is considered not vital. It can tell a lie. It can assert the wrong thing at the wrong time. JMRI fills the role of the guy miles away in the dispatch center who is requesting routes and watching to see what kind of indications he gets from the field. What LCC does, it acts like the field stuff, the wayside stuff, which is the role of the can't fail, super vital, fails in plausible ways, safe ways type stuff. So there's a very strict line which I have on my layout, which is that JMRI is for panels and remote control, and LCC is for signal logic along the wayside. So those right now, those are the only roles that JMRI fills on the layout. I don't use it for dispatching. My prototype, the Long Island Railroad, is extremely old school to this day, in the manner that they affect transportation department control over the trains on the railroad. They have 5 dispatchers. They all sit in a room. They are all responsible for different zones of the railroad, and all of the tower operators out along the wayside are just the eyes and ears and reflect the will of the dispatchers. So the dispatcher is God. He controls the railroad using tower operators, tower directors, and block operators. And my control scheme reflects that. There is a dispatcher who sits over there. There's a PBX phone system, and the dispatcher is blind. His knowledge of the railroad comes from people calling him on the phone. Right. There's 2 tower operators, one for the lower deck, which is busier, and one for the upper 2 decks, which are less busy. They give information to the dispatcher that helps him make decisions about how to run the railroad. Right. And they have the authority to make local routes as required, and little decisions that aren't very impactful, I guess you could say.
Yeah, right. So JMRI, the screens we got showing up there are purely, so if I'm trying to understand,
that's what the tower operator sees, yeah. or more appropriately, tower director.
Right. Okay.
That's JMRI does that for me. Does it very well. Those panels are quasi prototype. They are. And those are local panels that you show right there, the ones that are a little simpler. That's if the tower director gives a crew local control of an interlocking, there'll be a little tablet that's along the side of the layout where they can just throw the switches manually and move the switches themselves. But then JMRI does that. It handles the 2 consoles, computer consoles, as it were, in the 2 towers.
Back on the LCC a little bit. So we've got some photos up here of that's sort of an overview of, I think from memory, your LCC part of the system.
That's right. Yeah, that's an interlocking. There looks to be about 4 controlled switches there. And the little gray, that's I mean there's various bits and bobs there. That's a 8-channel block detector unit and a 4-signal head control unit that it's plugged into. Sure. And that is the end of the LCC network, because you can see one Cat5 cable and a terminator with the green light.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the terminator. Yeah. Like a lot of current loop type networks, it needs to have something at the end. It can't just be open. Yeah. So that's that's what you're looking at there. The blue and white twisted pair wires come from the current detectors, which is what I use for track circuits and train detection, is the Hall effect current sensor coils. Because that way I don't have to wire them in. I can wire the track a little bit more freely and then run the current sensor to wherever it's convenient to grab that particular signal circuit.
Sure.
I didn't like some of the detectors where you have to wire your feed to the detection section through the detector board and then off to the layout. I wanted it to be more linear than that. Sure. That's why I like current sensors.
Yeah, okay. That's like mine. All my current sensors are all feed to the module to the track, effectively. So,
So in this picture, there's a switch machine on the right, the gray square box. That's the MTB model's MP5 switch machine. There to the left of that is another signal LCC board. And that one, the gray cable does not go to a daughter board. It moves over to the left and it goes to something called a breakout board, which is where you see the black wires coming up from the bottom left and terminating in that little green terminal strip there. Yeah. So those it's 8 channels of some kind of input. Yeah, probably switch position.
Yep, no, I've gone too far.
Well, that's another podcast.
Yeah, that one is.
Talk about standard NX circuits. That's a series of podcasts.
Yeah, I think so. I put that in there just to show some of the work more than anything. So now,
yeah, I mean, business is based on typicals, right? So 50, 60 years ago, the American Association of Railroads published typical circuits that resembled what most railroads did in a very bland and general way. Yeah. That's what that page is.
Do you have many issues with those types of circuits, like regarding failure or anything like that?
No. Other than bad choices that I made, they're very clear in the switch machine manual that you should put only one wire inside the contact. And I'm like, I can put 2 wires in there. What could possibly go wrong? Well, what could possibly go wrong is that the 2 wires fall out. That's not their fault. That's my fault. So, no, I mean, I use railroad circuits hardware for LCC stuff. And they're not afraid to ask for money, but it's very good quality stuff. So I don't have any trouble with it. And if I have trouble with the implementation of it, if I'm doing some trickery where I'm using one output line as a sampling input line and I get completely confused and befuddled, a quick email exchange with Dick Bronson down there in North Carolina gets me all straightened out. So they support their products as well. So I'm proud to use their products on my layout. I am glad that they are currently the only LCC manufacturer that's pushing out product, because if it was somebody that didn't stand by their product as much, it'd be difficult, very difficult. Whenever I'm at Springfield, I make a beeline for the Railroad Circuits booth so I can talk to Dick and Karen before they get busy talking to all the other punters.
And they probably see you come and go, "Oh no, it's Dave."
No, they smile.
Yeah, good. Know. That's good. No, that's nice to know a company that does stick behind their products like that. That if you do have issues, you can, email them and set yourself straight, so to speak.
I mean, one of the reasons why the National Convention and Springfield to a degree are very good is because you can attach names to all these faces at the various companies. Yeah. Right. You can get a feel that if I want to talk to, somebody at the train control systems, right? One of the guys they have there that came up with the Wii throttle. I've met the guy that I'm probably going to talk to there, and I think that's extremely valuable because if I bug them enough, they're eventually going to remember me the next time I walk up to the convention, and they'll probably close the booth down, and turn off the lights.
So tell us about an operation session. So we'll take the COVID stuff out of it, because who wants to remember 2020 in regards to that? But
yeah, 2020 very bad review.
In an ideal world, we'll call it. Take COVID out of it. How often do you run your operating sessions?
Usually once a month, sometimes more often than that.
Sure.
It's part of the, I come up in the round robin. I recently gained a slot in the round robin rotation. Before that, I would operate whenever I could. If there was a week with, month with 5 Thursdays, or maybe a Saturday session or something like that. But, I was in a situation where I was doing, for 2 months in a row, I did a session 2 weeks in a row. And I like the idea of operating the layout every week, but it's just not practical to also be building a layout that needs to be human ready for visitors every 7 days.
Yeah, sure.
So, I think Jack Ozanich, may he rest in peace, probably had it correct, where he was operating like 2 or 3 days a week every week, because his layout was basically done and running. I'd love to have access to that many operators, but I live way out in the woods at the end of Long Island, and there's not a lot of people that are willing to drive out this far.
Yeah, sure.
But once a month, we'll say, to answer your question again in a very roundabout, long-winded way, once a month.
No, that's fine. So we'll talk the ideal world. So once a month you run. How many sort of positions do you hold in regards to how many operators? Ideally, do you like to run your railway to the optimum capacity?
I'll start with the least ideal. I've had 4 guys over and we've had a great time. You just do less.
Sure.
With a limited number of guys, I become the entire transportation department, the entire movement bureau, and I become frantic. In a perfect scenario, I'll have 9 to 11 guys by. There'll be 1 dispatcher, 2 tower directors, and they will control the flow of traffic over the railroad. I've started running an AM session and a PM session. When I realized that I was trying to do too much in a single 3-hour session, I split it. So the morning session starts with the morning commuter rush hour, and then things relax a little bit and the freights go out on the road. And the evening session starts with the evening rush hour, eastbound, and then quickly goes into a situation where there's very few passenger trains, and the freight guys can really start blocking the main and taking blocks of time that they could never do even in the middle of the day. So there'll be a yardmaster and a yardmaster assistant. The assistant also takes care of the runs into and out of staging, and might run a little local freight job. So that's 5 guys. The other operators, however many there are, they're going to run one-man crews on passenger trains at the beginning of the session, and then they're going to pair up and run freight jobs towards the end. And whoever gets the short stick runs passenger trains the entire session, because there needs to be – do you remember slot car sets that had the jam car, which was just kind of a car that drive around getting everybody's way?
Yeah.
It's reversed. It's not – you're not running freight on the Long Island Railroad if you don't have passenger trains to get out of the way of.
Sure.
So one guy, and I always try and make it a different guy, runs passenger trains around the layout for the whole session. And I try and vary it for him, between diesels and electrics and stuff like that. But that, I always thank the guy at the end of the session, because he's helped me tell the story of the layout by being a thorn in the sides of every freight crew that's out on the road. So that would be a typical session. Yeah. Passenger trains followed by freight trains, about 9 guys. Yeah. I can do it with 1 guy in the yard. I can do it with me and another tower operator. It's rare that I have enough guys that there's an actual dispatcher sitting in 204, but it has happened, and it's run well that way.
Yeah.
So I like that it's scalable, especially, regardless of the situation with the health of the world overall. Sometimes in vacation season, I may not get 9 guys, and so the fact that it can filter down and we can just run fewer passenger trains and concentrate on freight, those sessions have been very rewarding because they're much more relaxed.
Yeah, sure.
You know, no white knuckle terror for Dave on those.
So that's probably why I'm assuming where you looked into train controller purely because of the automation that you can put to it, I suppose, with automatic scheduling.
Yes.
And, I know that's how I've sort of set mine up, where I can, a bit similar to you, depending on how many operators I can get, I can either run a train fully automatically or fully manually over the same schedule, right, which is like point A to point B for people that don't know how a train controller runs. But obviously,
it's more like a mission.
Then you got issues with LCC or LCC. But
yeah. Well, some entity will be operating trains automatically on my layout, and that is so that Jamaica, which is kind of the hub of the Long Island Railroad, is busy enough.
Sure.
There needs to be a number of electric passenger services that literally pop up out of one hole, go through the station complex, stop, and then go into another hole. And that is a thankless job for somebody who's traveled any distance to be in your basement. Yeah. It is a perfect job for layout automation. Yeah. I've evaluated FreeWall, and the concept of a timetable schedule does not seem to be baked into their system. So I anticipate, unless something changes in the world of model railroad control, that when I get to the point where I would like to do that, it's either going to be remote operators with train cams, because now that's a thing, or it's going to be some level of automation, probably scripting that's put into JMRI. And because JMRI has automatic operation as well in this form of what they call a dispatcher and warrants and that whole thing. So there are people that are using JMRI to facilitate automatic operations, but I know that's going to be a years-long battle to get that working and well refined on this layout. But that's a ways out. There will be probably guys operating remotely with a train cam well before I have JMRI or train controller or the next thing operating things automatically. Yeah. That's where I'll leave it.
Yeah, sure. It's always a concern of mine when I start running trains automatically. Then I have my sort of semi-automatic or fully manual trains running in between. That these, regardless of the system and regardless of how much you're paying for a piece of software, it still relies on a good occupancy detection. And every now and again I have a few little Furbies within my system that I will throw up some sort of ghost occupancy. And, you know, it's nothing against any software. It's a wiring issue from my end or a hardware issue. It's not a software issue. That's just the way the program requires, and it thinks the train.
Oh yeah,
it's actually in block B, but it's actually in block A, and I haven't had any collisions yet. Touch wood, but there'll be something at some stage. I'm sure.
It's been said by somebody way smarter than me that if you're going to do any type of remote operation, your signaling system and especially your train detection system, it's got to be bulletproof.
Yeah.
And you can't have stalling trains, because nothing is more annoying than having to keep on shoving those guys with the old 050. Yeah. But your layout's got to run like a Swiss watch before you really think about running anything automatic on any kind of scale. Yeah. And hats off to guys that do it, because there's a lot of videos out there where the trains are just running themselves. And I like to watch them because I know the amount of work that must have gone into that behind the scenes.
You would enjoy. I was able to talk to some of the members of the Miniature Wonderland in Germany about some of the tech that they use.
Amazing.
It's just the program they run is off the shelf, and I can't remember which one it is. It's not train control. It's not iRock or anything like that, but it's off the shelf. They've obviously written for their car system. They've written some of their own programs.
Yes, that's right.
Some of the redundancies they've built into their programming, and knowing if alarms going off to a certain point, if this train is meant to be in block A but it's actually in block B, it means it's the point hasn't thrown properly or whatever. It's just phenomenal type of work that sits in behind that, but you'd expect that for a large enterprise like that, I suppose.
They are maniacs. I've been there one time. I felt like I could have stayed there for a week. We didn't have the forethought to line up the behind the scenes tour.
Sure.
I have no doubt that Joanna and I will be back in Hamburg at some point, and we will definitely take the behind the scenes tour when we go back. Yeah, absolutely.
So I suppose one other question I will ask, Dave, is what's currently on your bench? What are you currently working on the railway?
Right now, I laid a lot of track. I laid it really fast. I got the Helix was built to go up to the third deck, and I got Ronkonkoma Station done on the third deck in time for the first session in October. Right. And I busted my tuchus, and I got the town of Riverhead done for the second session the following week. And I was laying tracks so fast and just sort of getting it going so that the frogs were powered and there was enough power to get trains going that I did not think about the scheme of control that was going to keep trains safely spaced apart, going up Brentwood up to various branches on the Helix. Sure. So, as always happens when you don't fully bake the scheme of control, we had John Faraka minding his own business, leaving Ronkonkoma, headed towards Brentwood, and you had Mr. Ben Lederer running a freight train from Riverhead to Brentwood, Brentwood to Riverhead, going through Brentwood the opposite direction. And, it was one of those near-miss situations where everybody laughs and hits each other in the back. But if it had been a real railroad, it would have been catastrophic. Yeah, sure. So, it was fun. A good time was had by all. It was HO scale. But so what's on my bench right now is signals and train control for Brentwood and Ronkonkoma, so that I can at least have the tower director at Divide have sort of a clear block situation, go, no-go signal to police the Helix. So I've all of my layout pieces are removable. So both halves of Ronkonkoma have been out on my workbench, flipped upside down to get wired, to get train detection, to get the LCC hardware put in. I've got cars with resistors, with getting fixed with resistors, steel wheels, and couplers, because now that I have a train detection system, you've got to have resistors on every. It's a current-based system. You have to have resistors on every car. So it's made my habit of buying whatever shiny new freight car I want to buy abate somewhat, because now I know when these things show up in UPS, I don't get just to put them on the layout, run them around. Now I've got to put in metal KDs and put resistors on them. So that's on there. There are many parts of many different train cameras, which I had undertook to build during the lockdown. And after the lockdown was over and I started having operation sessions again, I had a little bit less fire to get that done, although I would love to get it done still. And my Anycubic Photon is on my workbench, and I've been printing out some obscure signal heads in configurations that aren't currently manufactured. So called pedestal signals, which are like small version of a full-size Pennsylvania home signal. I've been printing it out to take a little LED.
Just an interesting point is one question has just come to mind, and I didn't have it on my list. What sort of motive power are you running in rolling stock? What era are you modelling, I suppose, is the next thing.
If you had a tricorder in my basement, you would detect tachyon emissions, because all of the freight equipment is modern, and there is a time warp, and all of the passenger equipment is from prior to 1998. And that has to do with the fact that everybody loves Alcos, therefore Atlas and Athearn love to make Alcos. Sure. And so I was able to buy a lot of older Long Island Railroad diesels, and that's what's running on the passenger equipment. I have some resin kits for more up-to-date Long Island Railroad electric equipment, but that's a project for a rainy day, because taking the place of the electric runs, at least for now, are these Bachmann, British Rail 411 CEP electric unit sets. They are electric multiple unit railway equipment. You take them out of the box, you put them together, and they run. You cannot currently get a real good model in the U.S. of a U.S. prototype electric railroad that you can take out of the box and just run. I know that the Concor MP54s are out there, but I can't run them. They are garbage. There, I said it.
Heard it first.
But the freight equipment is modern.
Yeah.
The freight equipment is all modern. Atlas made New York and Atlantic paid scheme Jeeps, and of course MTH made theirs. Decided to make theirs later, and of course they made the same two road numbers. But I've got a very kind member of my operating crew, Ben Lederer, who's been renumbering and kitting out some of my New York and Atlantic Jeeps to be correct with ditch lights and marker lights and the rest of it. So Jeep 38s is the quick answer. My layout is set between 1997 and 2017, so I can justify running a little bit older passenger equipment on Long Island Railroad than is running today. The new stuff that they run today on the railroad started showing up in 98, 99, 2000. So and the New York and Atlantic started running their freight contract in 97. So older passenger stuff and newer freight stuff.
Yeah, lovely.
You'll see, there's no 40-foot box cars. There's 85-foot trash flats with municipal solid waste, 55-foot covered hoppers, aggregates cars, that type of thing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, cool.
Now, Dave, I don't have any other questions at this point in time. Been chatting for nearly an hour here. Who would have thought? We probably get, particularly the LCC stuff, I think it would be for another day. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper in that to get a better understanding, see whether I might move forward with something like that as well. So I thank you for taking the time away from your schedule and your family to come and chat with me on Model Railroad 10X. So I thank you very much again. Make sure you subscribe, click that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos. Support us on Patreon, like us on Facebook and Instagram at Model Railroad 10X.